Kia ora, bula, kia rana, talofa, maloalele, and welcome to Tupalangi and a Pisinisi pod. And it's great to be here telling these Pacific business stories. My name's Glen Murphy. I'm based here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, but love working across the Pacific.
And whakalofa lahi atu. I'm Dave Dewar, previously based in Suva, Fiji, and now based in Rarotonga, Cook Islands. Glen and I have worked together over the last 5 years with New Zealand businesses, Australian businesses, and Pacific businesses, helping them grow and succeed in this amazing part of the world. We've loved telling stories about all of the amazing opportunities across the Pacific, and it's fantastic to be doing so again in this weekly podcast.
And in this episode, the main feature is a wonderful Talanoa with Jesse Koorey-Slow, who is the head of the Niue Development Bank. But before we get into that Talanoa with Jesse, Dave, you've been hanging out with the Vice President of the World Bank, but more importantly, you've also been overhearing conversations which allowed you to break news to me about the appointment of the new All Black coach, which is one of the most important developments in New Zealand this week.
Yeah, I'm glad I messaged you when I did, Glenn, because otherwise people would be rolling their eyes and saying, "Oh yeah, sure you did, mate." But of course, so I sent you the WhatsApp message. I was at a bar in Auckland on it would have been Tuesday evening, and a very distinctive presence there in the form of Dave Rennie was also happened to be sitting right next to me at the bar, and I took a closer look at the person he was having a beer with, and that was looked uncannily like Steve Lancaster from the New Zealand Rugby Union. So I thought, well, either there's someone being let down not so gently, or actually they are looking like they're having a good conversation. So it was really cool to see that news the following day after I texted you. That of course he's been appointed as the head coach. And look, as a man who has both Cook Islands heritage, I think the first coach of Cook Islands heritage that's absolutely fantastic. It's being rightly celebrated across Rarotonga and the Cook Islands at the moment. But also as a man who's spent a lot of time in Upper Hutt, I feel a particular connection to him. That's probably where our similarities end. But huge congratulations to Dave Rennie on getting one of the toughest jobs in New Zealand, and really can't wait to see what happens next.
Yeah, and of course I can also claim some whakapapa there with his connection to the Waikato Chiefs. So fully support the appointment in this case.
Yeah, and true Pacific style, we'll all claim him, and no, I think that's we're all heavily invested in his success. So the other thing I was doing in Auckland was catching up, as you mentioned, with a delegation from the World Bank, and it was a really good event. I remember heading along to those industry briefings from the development organizations, several years ago, and just a very different vibe. It was just so good to see how much has changed in those last 5 years. So there's been a huge amount of reform in procurement policy, and the World Bank's really important as you're such a large global organization with about $250 billion of capital deployed. We've talked about the Asian Development Bank. Well, the World Bank's like, that even larger again. And they set a lot of those global standards for how procurement policy gets designed, written up, and implemented. And a lot of the other organizations draw on that when they implement their own policies. It was just fantastic to hear about some of the changes that they've brought in over the past 5 years. But more importantly, what's prompted those changes. And I think, there's really been a listening process that's occurred over the last few years, hearing from industry, hearing from borrowers and procurers, and particularly in countries like those in the Pacific that might have slightly different operating contexts than some of the bigger markets in Asia and Africa that they work in, and trying to figure out how they can resolve some of those issues. So they're using things like value for money criteria now, merit point criteria to ensure that actually these assets that go in have a longer and higher value total lifespan. They're using early market engagement to get a better sense from the industry early on about what they're planning and how that can meet market realities. They're using rosters or panels, as we call them in New Zealand, pre-vet, I suppose, some of the key organizations to make sure that they can, get in on things more quickly. And I think there's a lot of positive change that's happening. There's still a way to go. These changes, yes, they've taken place over a few years, but they'll take a while to bed out in actual practice on the ground. But such a positive vibe in the room. Huge kudos to Galina Vincelet, who's the Vice President for Operations, Policy and Country Strategy, who led the delegation, to Diomedes Berroa, who's the Procurement Manager for Asia Pacific, who stayed around all day talking one-on-one to a lot of Kiwi businesses about those changes. And, I just really got a sense that there's an openness there to having that conversation.
And Dave, can you summarise the sort of businesses that were in the room talking to them? I'm assuming that the big infrastructure players were there, but was there a mix and were there kind of different views in those businesses, or how was it received?
We had about 45 to 50 representatives in the room. And if I had to kind of categorize them, a large chunk of those are consultants, big engineering consultancies, businesses like Becker, Onken and Taylor, Tech, and then you had a group of contractors, so the people that actually get in there and stick, shovels in the ground and build the stuff. We had the likes of Downer, McConnell Dowell, Fulton Hogan, very large scale, well-known names across New Zealand and Australia, as well as a couple of, what we would call smaller players, the likes of businesses such as Pacific Engineering Projects, MAP Projects, which have, despite not being of that scale, have nevertheless done a huge amount of work across the Pacific over many years, and really are operating at a level of intensity that kind of works for a lot of these Pacific projects, which aren't the huge multi-billion-dollar type things that you'd expect in bigger markets. Really good to give them the opportunity to get in front of the World Bank and talk about some of the opportunities that they see and the challenges that they face.
Oh, it's awesome that somebody with that level of seniority made the trip, and I believe she was heading, or the delegation was heading on to Canberra after being in Auckland. So great that they're doing that outreach. Hey, Dave, of course, the other big news that has been going on this week is the upheaval in the Middle East. And, the ramifications of that from a business point of view will obviously have more than ripples right throughout the world in terms of what's going on. Do you want to just talk briefly about how you see a couple of the key things for the Pacific in a business context? Flowing out of that.
Yeah, and it is pretty disastrous, isn't it, Glenn? I think this isn't a politics focused podcast, so we won't go into the whys and wherefores of what's happening in the Middle East. But I think to acknowledge just the very direct and immediate human toll that's happening over there. So stay safe and really send all of our thoughts out to them. But at another level, it is a time where you do recognise how blessed we are to be living in this part of the world. However, it can still, affect us. And a couple of the things I've seen reflected on in the last couple of days have been, I saw the Fiji Reserve Bank governor was giving an address to a business audience in Suva earlier this week. And he was talking about sort of the duality of it. So at one level, we're going to see a rise in fuel prices. The Strait of Hormuz, blockaded. Something like, I think, 20 to 25% of all exported fuel being tied up in all of that. There will inevitably be a rise in fuel price, and we're already seeing that flow through. The reality is in the Pacific, you're often a market taker and you're utterly dependent on imported fuel. Not so much for vehicles, although that is important, but for your entire energy use. And,
in Australia during the week, Dave, as you know, and I noted there that there's already quite a lot of noise in the media about the fuel companies already pushing up the retail price of petrol, when normally it takes a 7-day lag for any price decrease to flow through.
Yeah, absolutely. And it compounds, right? Because, you've got the fuel price itself, and then, of course, you've got the fuel cost of freight, and of course all of this fuel has to be shipped to places like the Pacific, so that's going to be a compounding cost on top of that, plus all of the other things that are going to flow through into the supply chain at every step of the way. And it's why fuel prices are so influential on economic conditions. So
and I know you've talked before about how a number of Pacific nations actually rely on diesel for their electricity generation. And this does, therefore, perhaps put even another imperative behind renewables.
I couldn't agree more, Glenn. I think, if you needed another reason for why, renewable energy, solar in particular, is just so vital as an economic resilience motivator, this is really, I think, going to add a lot of impetus, but also urgency around getting some of these renewable energy transitions underway in the Pacific. Because I think the other thing you're going to see is a big rise in demand for solar panels globally, and all of those inputs into renewable energy. So I'll tell you what, if you're listening in from the Pacific, and if you've got a solar project that's ready to go, and the solar panels have already been manufactured, get them in the ground as quickly as you can, because they're only going to, that manufacturing price is only going to go up. I think the other point that the Reserve Bank governor made was, of course, there is a potential benefit that Pacific countries might see in terms of, that vital importance of the tourism economy. And, as the world gets scarier further afield, well, the greater the likelihood or the propensity of travelers closer to home to stay closer to home. I think possibly offset also by the fact that travel costs are probably going to go up with that fuel price rise as well.
Yeah, so even if the natural beauty and wonderful hospitality of the Pacific isn't enough to encourage tourists to get there, then the relative safety and the closeness make it even more attractive.
And perhaps that segues quite nicely into the chat that we had today with with Jesse from Niue, because that's a part of the Pacific that perhaps not so many people would have had the chance to visit, but it's probably one of the real hidden gems, but certainly is a gem by all accounts. And I think maybe the Niue tourism industry will be looking at some potential there.
Oh, mate, I mean, certainly listening to him, like I've never been to Niue. I've never thought about it before as a place to go, but listening to him describe it and talking about the beauty of the place, and particularly the clarity of the water. I want to go in whale watching season, mate. That sounds amazing.
Sounded pretty epic, didn't it? And you just hear incredible stories about how stunning that water is in Niue. We get a lot of whales that come through in Rarotonga. They're just seeing them up close is another thing altogether.
Yeah. Well, on that note, Dave, should we head into the discussion with Jesse and hear it in his own words about how wonderful Niue is, how he's enjoying it, and about the importance of the work that he's doing with the Niue Development Bank and some of the initiatives I've got going on as well. So let's Talanoa with Jesse.
Well, today we're going to somewhere a little bit different to some of the places that we've talked about on this podcast before. And we're talking to Jesse Koorey-Slow. So Jesse and I go back quite a way. He and I both grew up in Wellington and knew one another through university. 15 months ago, Jesse popped up back on my radar as the chief executive of the Niue Development Bank. And so I thought it was a great opportunity for us to get together and talk about what he's been doing and what that awesome part of the world is like. Many New Zealanders, I think, will have heard of Niue, but perhaps not that many will have visited or understand what it's like to live and do business there. So, Jesse, welcome. Kia ora. And I wonder if we could just kick off with, like we usually do, a little bit about you. How is it that you came to be running the Niue Development Bank?
Yeah, kia ora. Whakalofa laki atu. Yeah, so in my 20s was working across financial markets, and then in my 30s I worked with ANZ and across commercial property, commercial business, lending, and then the last sort of 5 or 6 years in ANZ private. So mainly with a few other team members, the lending side of ANZ private. So that was great, and then was looking for a new challenge, and the Niue International Trust Fund, through some other people I knew, were running some money and, on the investment side. And someone said, would you and your young family, I've got 2 girls who are 5 and 7 and my wife, would you be interested? So we flew up here, and for about 3 days, we had a convincing committee, which involved my chairman, Ian Fitzgerald, and Ross Ardern, who was the old High Commissioner here, and Mark Blumsky and a couple of others. And the convincing committee convinced me, and then I just had to convince Cordy and my wife. So, and here we are, kids at school. And
she wasn't appearing before the committee.
She was up there in the convincing committee. When we were going home, she's like, "What percentage are you?" And I said, "Oh, I'm 90." And she said, "Oh, I'm about 40 to 50."
Oh, there was a bit more convincing to do on the flight, was there?
Yeah. And then I went to my grandfather, who's 92 now, down in Blenheim, and I said to him, "What?" And I said, "Have you got any advice for me?" He said, "Take every opportunity that's put in front of you." Here we are.
Awesome. Bloody good advice, especially in this part of the world, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. But interesting. So how have the family found the move? Is Claudia up over 50% now?
Yeah, so Claude's definitely got up into the 80s, I think. And living here, certainly between October and March, when it's not really tourist season, cyclone watch, very hot, very humid, as you know, and not much doing. That can be more difficult in terms of networks, but the kids and Claude spend Christmas at home in New Zealand. And when we do come back, they jump into school. When we first arrived, the heat was just something in February, we couldn't get used to. And trying to, I'm the master of flat pack furniture now. So, but yeah, as we get into tourist season, we have friends and family coming to visit. And invariably there's yachts that drop by with kids who haven't seen other kids for a while. And so you're out for dinner and you end up spending 2 or 3 different nights with those kids, or they come around to our place and jump on the tramp, or, so the tourist season is good fun, similar to the Cook Islands.
Well, you must have a strong marriage, Jesse, to have survived both a move to a place like Niue and also the flat pack furniture assembly process.
Yeah, and I mean, you laugh about it, but it is something my chairman Ian Fitzgerald did say. He said, don't think you can move up there and it's going to fix anything for you. You actually need to be a strong family unit to come up here. It's really connected to New Zealand. It's 3 hours to Auckland. That's not an issue, but it is only 1 flight a week outside of tourist season, 2 flights. Otherwise, there's 1 boat a month. You can kind of feel isolated, but at the same time, you're not that isolated.
Being a family in the Pacific is one of the most awesome things about it. It's a bit like that anywhere, but super important in the Pacific. So have you noticed that too?
It's been amazing. And when the kids do the cultural concert and all those sort of things, my kids are up there with all of and the night before, me and Claudia, I was pretty useless at it, but making all of all of the plant folding, around the ankles. And then on the day, all these Niuean parents come up to us saying, you must be so proud. They're up there singing Niuean, and they were as proud as we were, so it's been brilliant. But yeah, my wife Claudia is, awesome. And I think the main challenge for her is, how do we find enough of that fruit to get into the lunch boxes?
Yeah, awesome, mate. Well, maybe if we could talk a little bit about just the sort of, what your job involves. What is it that the NDB actually does?
Yeah, pretty wide ranging. I'm on the tools, as you would think. Like today is plane day. So when I get off this podcast, I've got to get to the office and get the post to the plane. And every now and then this is one island where there's too much cash comes on the island. So if you're a tourist, don't bring cash. There's things like that we deal with plane day. And then outside of that, we're running NDB as the lending engine, personal loans, housing loans, vehicle loans, business loans. Alongside that, we run a Kiwi Bank agency branch. So that would be similar to small town New Zealand, where the pharmacist is also running the branch. Yep. So that's a transactional service for the island. We also administer FPOS on the island. So it's wide ranging. Internet's really good with Telecom Niue here. And so we run that side of it, and that's actually via ANZ New Zealand. We run Niue Post, and then alongside that, I manage a couple of the properties for the government, because we're a state-owned enterprise, somewhere between a charity and a not-for-profit.
You must have a lot of stakeholders in that, Jesse, that you need to be ensuring the relationships are strong with and listening to, I imagine?
Some people call it stakeholder management, and I don't think of it as management because I'm not managing them, but that stakeholder influence is really important. And something my chairman said to me really early on, he said, what you're doing is not complicated, but it can be complex. So in every other job I've had in New Zealand, if it's complicated, me and others put our heads together and we work it out. Over here, it's not complicated, but it can be complex. And that's sort of what you're touching on there, Glen. Coming out of ANZ, and I was very lucky to be on a leadership course called Ngā Parido. Ngā Parido is around Māori Pacific, sort of diverse backgrounds of people, and just learning what that is, learning to listen. And a Māori thing that I learned around tika pono aroha, that tika doing right, and pono, kind of doing the right thing, and aroha doing things with love or care. So I'm not always going to be everyone's best friend, but I think if I hold that, then, everyone can at least respect the decision and sort of work with each other.
The other impression I get from, just listening to you is what an incredibly important role you must have in that community in Niue. And, how do you sort of feel about that? Because it's, you kind of are supplying so many important services to business and even the postal service, is pretty critical. So,
Yeah.
yeah,
I see it actually not about me. It's about me empowering my team to really lead. And as you're probably aware, in the Pacific and the culture and the hierarchy, and for beautiful reasons, often people will look to the boss. What do you think, boss? Yeah. And it doesn't sit that easy with me. Since I've been here, my first question back to my staff is, well, what do you think? Why would I support you in this decision? And trying to create that sort of round table where we together, we do things. So yeah, it's me dropping the post, but I'm actually doing that on behalf of, my staff member who is running Niue Post. Hey, look, you're
right.
busy doing that. I'll drop the post for you. I'm not a teller. The front
Right.
desk team are brilliant at that. I get messages saying, "Oh, can you help me with a payment?" Yeah, the team can really help you. I'm as good as you are. So empowering people to think and empowering people to really lead. And I've seen some great examples out of certainly our younger staff around when the light bulb turns on and they go, yeah, right, I can do this, and it's really
Yeah.
really cool. Mm.
Yeah.
But one example which is very funny, on the first day I was here, and I was down the bowls club, and I was sitting there, and I was sitting next to a guy. I didn't really know who he was at the time, Dalton. As it turns out, Dalton Tangalangi's the Prime Minister. and the beers was sliding across the table, and I was sort of like, oh, I probably need to get out of here, because someone had said once you have 6 beers, you want to get out of there. And he whacked me on the leg, and he said, the way to get out of here? Go to the toilet and walk out the back. And that was from Dalton and Prime Minister, and so that was very good advice for me as well. So great to connect in the bowls club and the golf club and all those things, and know when it's your time just to sidle off.
Very,
cool.
very good advice, and I think probably not just limited to Niue as well. We should probably give another shout out to a connection of ours, and that's Mr. Hone Patrick. So that's a name that'll be familiar to many of our Fijian listeners.
Yeah, love Hone and the whole Patrick whānau.
As we were talking about before the show, your connections and networks are really sort of what it's all about in this part of the world, right? So, even in a place like Niue, which is, relatively small population on island, but, you were saying there's a huge network of people, from Niue and who have been in Niue and worked there. And I wonder if you've sort of noticed some of those connections kind of across the region.
Yeah, and it's an interesting month in Niue, because there's 1,820 people apparently live here, which is tiny, but there's 35,000 in New Zealand and another 5 to 10,000 in Australia. So something I did before I left ANZ, I reached out to the Ora Moana network, the Māori Pacific network, and I said, anyone on here that's Niuean? And there would have been 8 to 10 in Wellington alone that worked for ANZ. And so I just had a coffee with a few of them and said, well, what village are you from? And most of them came back and said, I've never been there, which was really cool in itself. And I'd almost lit their fire to go, oh yeah, maybe I should, so Niue itself is 65 kilometres around. It's bigger than Rarotonga, but there's 1,800 people. And in that sense, there's 15,000 tourists, which is kind of capped by the planes. But the local population couldn't sustain much more than that. So really encourage any Niuean who's doing anything in New Zealand, Australia to do with properties, banking, or any skills, just reach out to me, reach out to anyone, and really encourage Niueans to move back home, and it's a great place, and there are opportunities. It's going to be done in steps. It's going to be self-determined, which I think is really important, and it's going to be at the right pace.
Yeah. When we interviewed Sir Ewan from Rarotonga a few weeks ago, Jesse, and he talked a lot about tourism in the Cooks and the growth of local business and how that's developed around the tourism industry. Are you seeing that in Niue as well?
Yeah, it's interesting, because when you talk about exports and you think Niue, you think noni juice, but
as well, great honey in Niue. Yeah.
Yeah, Niue honey, but Niue doesn't really make any money out of Niue honey, because it's put in barrels and it's all done in Auckland. Yeah. What really are we exporting? We don't have a harbour or fishing boat, so it's really hard with the fishing side of things. We've got tourism, and the way I look at it, during COVID, that was difficult, and so people said we need to diversify. I think you do need to diversify in a sense, but actually tourism is the only game in town, and that needs to form the basis of how you build other industry or build a population and things like that. So you almost use tourism as that sort of springboard for other things. So in the near to medium term, tourism is the game in town. And how can we, with 2 flights a week, respectfully extract cash out of tourists, broadly across the economy, not just at the resort. The Matavai does really well, but how do we support all that other local business?
I imagine that, your organisation, the NDB, plays a really critical role in enabling that scale, enabling business to kind of, take advantage of some of those opportunities and grow, right?
It's in its infancy, I would say. It's a really interesting dynamic when you've got a developing nation that's got no poverty, because it's backed by New Zealand and 60% of the working age population here work for the government. Nobody's really hard up. Therefore, in terms of a business community, and something we work with the chamber on, is how do we develop the thinking and ideas to even start that? So I talked to a year 10 class around young entrepreneurs and careers and things like that. And I said, if you cut down 10 coconuts, it takes you about 30 minutes, and you could sell those for $10 a pop to a tourist, and you've just made $100 on a Saturday. Oh, yeah, okay. So actually my role is being that catalyst and that facilitator for that self-determination on that stuff.
That is super cool, mate. Well, I wonder if we could end on a question that I really like asking guests on the show, and that's thinking about the people that are listening in. What's the sort of advice that you would have about how to operate effectively from what you've seen, how to be your best self in this part of the world, and how to do good business?
2 ears, 1 mouth. Start listening. Be on the ground. Be here on a Wednesday. If you've got to go to John's Bar, all relative, then go there and have a beer and listen. Go to the bowls club. The other thing is work with and working with, whether it's clients or staff, it's around building. I talk about capacity and capability. How do we build that capability? And I could come up here and do it all if I knew what I was doing. But how am I leaving the jersey or the seat in a better place? So, it can be frustrating at times in different things, but working with the people is just, and being on the ground and listening, really.
Yeah. And I guess the good thing is now we all know how to get out of the bowls club once we've had 6 beers.
Hey, Jesse, look, whakaue lahi, it's been awesome talking to you today, mate. Awesome to just get that sense of, Niue. I loved, we didn't even really touch on how beautiful the whale season is over there, and, the crystal clear water and all of that. So plenty of reasons for anyone listening in to sort of book one of those twice a week flights when the season opens up and get over there to see you, right?
Yeah, book it in. Visibility, there's no rivers here, so visibility 50 to 70 meters. Yeah, the whales look like they're on your TV. 20 meters offshore, it's brilliant. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah, well, look, it's interesting hearing about the bank, because one of the other things that we've been touching on throughout the podcast series has been the impact of digitization. And I think you've got something quite exciting happening this week. So just wondered if you wanted to have a bit of a chat about that.
Yeah, so really lucky to have an Auckland-based company called CrediSense come up on island this week, Richard and Sean. And we're basically digitizing the end-to-end loan process, and it's going to be more efficient. It's going to be great for the bank. But the really important aspect is we've partnered with the Niue Oceanwide Trust. So now is basically looking after the ocean. Bit of a plug for them. You can buy for $200 or $250, you can buy a square kilometre of the ocean, and it's protected.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so get in touch, look it up, Niue Oceanwide Trust. And the reason that we've partnered with them is, yes, there's lending, but there's also facilitation payments and facilities that need to be, advanced to villages and things like that. And this digitization of the process will be able to capture data. It will also be able to capture that the villages have ticked it off, had their right meetings, got the right people involved, things like that. So it's a really exciting, first step for us in digitizing not only the loan process, but really that data capture that we can positively use from a high level perspective, not individual data, to really work out from a Niue perspective, where is the growth, but also how do we move into that blue economy? Call it a blue-green bank, that sustainability. We just got diesel cars. Oh, have you considered a hybrid? Why not? And if we get that data of why not, you can't get it on the Matson boat, or it was too expensive, then we can respond to that with 1% loans. The government might say no customs on a hybrid, things like that. It starts bringing up ideas. So great to be working with the Niue Oceanwide Trust and the CrediSense team. I'd say anyone around the Pacific, this technology is no code. It's really easy to put in. And the guys have been brilliant.
Really interesting about what you're saying around data, because that actually touches on an interview that we had last week with Chris Saley and Nina Wetzel from Kahuto Pacific, and they're doing, looking at actual LiDAR and GIS data from drones and aerial survey and hydrographics, but addressing a very similar problem, right? The absence of data that is such a crucial foundation for any sort of development, whether it's infrastructure or digital and economic development.
Yeah, and the interesting part is we can get data, but it takes weeks and manual and someone sitting there trying to work it all out. I refuse to do that. And the reason is I want to keep challenging ourselves. How can we capture it at the point that people don't get survey fatigue, and actually it's easy for us.
So Dave, another fantastic Talanoa with a brilliant person doing great things in the Pacific and the business community. So Jesse and the Niue Development Bank, which is kind of not really a development bank, and it's sort of more everything that you'd ever need in Niue, and so important for that business community and really the community as a whole, I guess, is what I took from it. And I suppose some of the other highlights for me, Dave, were the listening to some of Jesse's motivations personally in terms of what he's doing. And he spoke about Tiki Pono Aroha that he picked up from a leadership program, and, how that's all about, doing the right things with love, which sounds like an awesome philosophy to be taking into the Pacific and into a role like he's got. So yeah, what was your take? Any highlights that came out for you?
I loved it, Glenn. I think, great to catch up with Jesse. It's been a while since we were last talking, but he got in touch a few weeks ago saying that he's been listening to the podcast, and so good to catch up with him. Jesse's a mate who goes back a long way, and it's just so cool to see, some of the good work that he's doing out in this part of the world. Yeah. Just so cool to see how they've grown into the place. And some of his reflections on what it means to be, successful there, to empower people to get things done. You're not someone coming in with all the answers, and in fact, awesome to see that he's doing that in that part of the world.
Yeah, Dave, I reckon the other thing for me, if I reflect on that, is his talk about the initiatives that they've got underway with digitization and trying to, improve not just their own process, but their whole contribution to the economy. And that sort of says what you see, I think, a lot around the Pacific now is people are really thinking about how do we modernize, how do we drive forward, how do we do that in a way that resonates with the local people and actually develops things that they want, but being right up there with the rest of the world.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, to see that initiative being led from within the Niue Development Bank obviously has a government, connection to it, and it's a sort of a central part of the system there, but kind of being led through a private sector lens, right? So, a lot of the traditional theories about development or models of development and economic growth in this part of the world have, assumed that it's sort of like a big external development partner, but actually you're sort of seeing through what Jesse was saying, some ground up work that can be done at actually relatively low, low impost and cost through the private sector that can support not just his own organization and not just the efficiency within the bank, but actually provide all of that, really useful data that can underpin so many more opportunities in the broader ecosystem.
Yeah, so look, a big Vanaka, big thank you again to Jesse for spending time with us and for sharing his journey and his story. And so that's another week for Tupalangi and a PCNC pod. And looking forward to the week ahead, Dave. Of course, my big thing on my agenda is the Moana Pacifica versus Blues game on the coming weekend. Definitely looking forward to going along, and I will be torn as to who I'm supporting. It's, been a long time Blues supporter through the highs and the lows.
You're going to be conflicted a bit over the next couple of weeks, aren't you, with Moana first and then the Drua coming later in the month?
Yeah, totally.
And of course, I had a similar conflict last week when the Drua played the Hurricanes, and as the Drua got one up over my traditional team,
Yeah.
But no, big week ahead, Glenn. I'm sure there will be a lot going on in the Pacific for us to have a look at when we next catch up in a week's time. So in the meantime, I hope everyone else has enjoyed that episode. Please tell all of your friends. Please subscribe, Apple, Spotify, or watch us in full color on YouTube. And keep the feedback coming. We've loved getting the messages, whether it's through LinkedIn, Viber, WhatsApp, Messenger. Or, of course, we have our email address, 2.palangi, PALAGI @gmail.com. If there's any thoughts you have, feedback on the show, or other ideas for people or organisations that you'd like us to cover. But in the meantime, whakaoe lahi to all of those that have been listening in today. This has been Tū Palangi in a Pesenesi pod for the week ending the 7th of March.